They were the most powerful people on Earth, surrounded by guards, protected by armies, feared by nations, and yet, they died in ways that would horrify a peasant. Because here's what history keeps proving. The crown is not a shield, it's a target. These are 8 royals who learned that lesson the hard way. Kings who were poisoned by their own banquets. Queens who watched the executioner miss. Emperors whose families were erased in basements. Their power didn't save them. It's exactly what killed them. Case 1. Erik V of Denmark. November 22, 1286. Finderup, Denmark. King Erik V woke to the sound of footsteps. He was staying at a barn, a temporary shelter during a hunting trip. His guards were stationed outside. His kingdom was at peace. There was no reason to worry, but someone had been planning this night for months. At some point between midnight and dawn, a group of men entered the barn. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't make demands. They simply walked to where the king was sleeping and stabbed him. 56 times. The forensic reality: Erik V was conscious for at least the first several wounds. The stab pattern suggests he tried to defend himself. Cuts on his forearms indicate he raised his arms to block the blades. But against multiple attackers in darkness, he had no chance. The irony? Erik V had spent his entire reign fighting to limit the power of his nobles. He'd imprisoned bishops, seized church lands, made enemies of everyone who should have protected him. His own marshal, Stig Anderson, was later accused of organizing the assassination. The man sworn to defend the king allegedly paid for his murder. He was surrounded by an army. He died alone in a barn. 9 men were eventually convicted. None were ever captured. Erik V's killers lived free for the rest of their lives, while the king they murdered was buried at 29. But poisoned banquets claim kings just as easily as blades. Case 2. Ramesses III, 1155 BCE. Thebes, Egypt. Ramesses III ruled Egypt for 31 years. He defeated the Sea Peoples, built temples that still stand today, expanded an empire. He was murdered by his wife over a promotion. Queen Tai wanted her son Pentuer on the throne instead of the designated heir. So she organized what historians now call the harem conspiracy, a plot involving dozens of officials, servants, and even a general. The method? A blade across the throat. In 2012, CT scans of Ramesses III's mummy revealed what ancient records had hidden: a deep cut wound, severing his trachea and major blood vessels. The incision was so severe that embalmers inserted an amulet, the Eye of Horus, into the wound to magically heal him in the afterlife. The conscious agony. A severed trachea doesn't kill instantly. Ramesses III likely remained aware for 60 to 90 seconds as blood filled his airways. He would have tried to breathe. He couldn't. The irony? Ramesses III survived invasions from Libya, Syria, and the Mediterranean. He built a mortuary temple specifically to celebrate his military victories. He died because he chose the wrong woman to trust. The conspiracy failed in its ultimate goal. Pentuer never took the throne. He was forced to commit suicide. Tia's fate is unknown, though ancient texts suggest she was left to die. The pharaoh who defeated armies fell to a single blade, but some royals saw their executioners coming and still couldn't escape. Case 3. Anne Boleyn, May 19, 1536. Tower of London, England. Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold at approximately 8 a.m. She had been Queen of England for 3 years. She was 35 years old. Henry VIII had imported a French swordsman specifically for this execution. The traditional English method, an axe, was considered too brutal for a queen. A sword, wielded by an expert, would be cleaner. It was. Eyewitness accounts describe Anne kneeling upright. There was no block. She tucked her dress beneath her knees. She asked the gathered crowd to pray for her. Then she waited. The executioner approached from behind, so she wouldn't see the blade coming. He called out to his assistant, "Bring me the sword." And when Anne turned her head toward the voice, he struck from the opposite direction. One clean cut. The irony? Anne Boleyn was executed for treason, adultery, and incest, charges almost certainly fabricated. Henry VIII wanted a new wife. The law required Anne to die first. She had been his obsession. He'd broken from the Catholic Church to marry her, created a new religion, split England from Rome. 3 years later, he had her head removed to make room for Jane Seymour. The woman who made a king defy the Pope couldn't make him show mercy. Anne's body was buried in an unmarked grave within the tower. No coffin had been prepared. They used an arrow chest. But at least Anne's execution was quick. The next queen on our list wasn't so fortunate. Case 4. Mary, Queen of Scots. February 8, 1587. Fotheringhay Castle, England. Mary Stuart had been imprisoned for 19 years. Today, her cousin Elizabeth I had finally signed the death warrant. Mary walked into the Great Hall wearing a black velvet dress. When she removed her outer garments at the scaffold, the crowd gasped. Underneath, she was dressed entirely in crimson red, the color of Catholic martyrdom. She knelt. She placed her head on the block. She prayed aloud in Latin. The executioner raised his axe and swung. He missed her neck. The blade struck the back of her skull. Mary's lips moved. Witnesses reported she whispered, "Sweet Jesus," as blood poured from her head. The second blow hit her neck but didn't sever it completely. The executioner had to use the axe like a saw, cutting through the remaining sinew and muscle. The conscious agony. Medical analysis suggests Mary remained conscious for 10 to 15 seconds after the first blow. The human brain can function briefly even with catastrophic trauma. She felt the blade miss. She felt it hit again. She may have felt the sawing. Then came the final indignity. When the executioner lifted what he thought was Mary's head to show the crowd, her auburn hair came away in his hand. It was a wig. Mary's real head, gray and close-cropped, rolled across the platform. According to multiple accounts, her lips continued moving for several more seconds. The irony? Mary had a legitimate claim to the English throne. Elizabeth kept her alive for nearly 2 decades because killing an anointed queen set a dangerous precedent. In the end, Elizabeth signed the warrant anyway, then blamed her secretary for sending it. Elizabeth publicly claimed she never wanted Mary dead. Privately, she'd been waiting for an excuse. Mary spent 19 years as a prisoner. She spent 15 seconds as a butchered one. Her son, James VI of Scotland, did eventually inherit the English throne from Elizabeth. The woman who ordered his mother's botched execution died childless. James became King of England 17 years after watching nothing. He didn't attend his mother's funeral, but individual executions pale compared to what happens when an entire royal family is marked for erasure. Case 5. The Romanovs. July 17, 1918. Yekaterinburg, Russia. At 2:15 a.m., the Romanov family was woken and told to dress. They were being moved, their captors said. White army forces were approaching. They needed to go to the basement for their safety. Nicholas II led his family downstairs. His wife Alexandra, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, their son Alexei, and 4 servants. 11 people total. They were arranged against a wall. Nicholas asked for chairs for his wife and son. Alexei had hemophilia and couldn't stand for long. Yakov Yurovsky, the commander, began reading from a paper. Nicholas interrupted. "What? What?" Yurovsky answered, "Your relations have tried to save you. They have failed. We must now proceed to execute you." Then 12 men walked into the room with revolvers. The conscious agony. The execution was chaos. The shooters had been assigned targets, but the room filled with smoke instantly. Bullets ricocheted off the walls. Several Romanovs didn't die from the first volley. The daughters had sewn 18 pounds of diamonds into their corsets, which partially deflected bullets. Anastasia and Maria were found alive after the shooting stopped. They were bayoneted. Alexei, the 13-year-old heir, was shot twice in the head at point-blank range. He was still moving after the initial barrage. A servant, Anna Demidova, defended herself with a pillow filled with jewels. She was stabbed over 30 times. The entire execution took 20 minutes. The irony? Nicholas II had abdicated 16 months earlier. He wasn't even Tsar anymore. He'd given up his power voluntarily, hoping it would save his family. It made them easier to kill. The Bolsheviks initially denied the executions. They announced Nicholas had been shot, but claimed the family was moved to safety. The bodies were stripped, burned with acid, and buried in unmarked forest graves. It took 70 years to find them. They gave up their throne to stay alive. They were murdered anyway. But some deaths weren't quick bullets or botched beheadings. Some were designed to last. Case 6. King Ælla of Northumbria, 867 CE, York, England. King Ælla had made powerful enemies. Years earlier, he'd captured the legendary Viking leader Ragnar Lothbrok and, according to Norse sagas, executed him by throwing him into a pit of venomous snakes. As Ragnar died, he allegedly prophesied how the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers. The little pigs were his sons, and they came for Ælla with an army. When the great heathen army captured Ælla after the fall of York, Ragnar's sons didn't just kill him. They made a statement. The method, the blood eagle. According to multiple Norse sources, Ælla was restrained face down. His back was cut open along the spine. His ribs were severed from the backbone and pulled outward to resemble wings. His lungs were extracted and draped over the exposed ribs. The conscious agony. Modern analysis suggests a victim could survive the initial incisions. The lungs would continue functioning for several minutes, even after extraction if the procedure was performed carefully. Ælla may have watched his own organs being arranged into a pattern. Historians debate whether the blood eagle actually happened or was a literary invention. The archaeological evidence is inconclusive. But the fact remains, this is what people believed happened to kings who made the wrong enemies. The irony? Ælla killed Ragnar in a pit of snakes, a death that took hours. He received one that took longer. He chose a slow death for his enemy. His enemy's sons returned the favor. But not all royal deaths were punishments. Some were accidents of youth and inexperience. Case 7. Lady Jane Grey. February 12, 1554. Tower of London, England. Lady Jane Grey was 16 years old. She had been queen for 9 days. Jane never wanted the crown. Her father-in-law, the Duke of Northumberland, had manipulated the succession to place her on the throne after Edward VI's death. When Mary I arrived with an army, Jane's support evaporated overnight. She'd been a pawn. Now she was a threat. Mary initially spared Jane's life. She was, after all, just a teenager who'd been used by ambitious men. But when Jane's father joined a rebellion against Mary, the queen had no choice. A living Jane was a rallying point for Protestant rebels. She had to die. On the scaffold, Jane asked the executioner, "Will you take it off before I lay me down?" She meant her head. "No, madam," he replied. Jane blindfolded herself, then couldn't find the block. She panicked, reaching out blindly. "What shall I do? Where is it?" A bystander had to guide her hands to the wood. The irony? Jane Grey was executed for a crown she never wanted. She wrote to Mary, renouncing any claim. She begged to live as a private citizen. Mary signed the death warrant anyway. Jane's last recorded words, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." She was queen for 9 days. She was dead at 16. Her body was buried beside Anne Boleyn's, another queen who learned that crowns don't protect you. And finally, perhaps the strangest royal death of all, one caused not by enemies, but by celebration. Case 8. King Sigurd I of Norway, 1130 CE, Norway. King Sigurd I was a crusader king. He'd led Norwegian forces to Jerusalem, fought battles across the Mediterranean, returned home a hero. He died from a drinking contest. The historical record is fragmented, but Norse chronicles suggest Sigurd's final years were marked by heavy alcohol consumption and what modern historians interpret as episodes of mental illness, possibly exacerbated by his drinking. One account describes his death occurring during or shortly after a feast. He'd been celebrating. He drank too much. His body couldn't process it. The conscious agony. Acute alcohol poisoning doesn't kill instantly. The body shuts down in stages: vomiting, loss of coordination, difficulty breathing, seizures, then cardiac arrest. A healthy adult can remain conscious through much of this process. Sigurd may have known something was wrong for hours before his organs failed. The clinical reality: at fatal blood alcohol concentrations, the brainstem begins to fail. Breathing becomes irregular, the heart rhythm destabilizes, but the higher brain functions, consciousness, awareness, can persist longer than the body they inhabit. The irony? Sigurd I survived sea voyages, sieges, and battles with Saracen armies. He navigated his ships through storms and hostile waters. He came home to Norway as a living legend and died because he couldn't stop drinking at a party. He conquered Jerusalem. He was conquered by Mede. Sigurd was approximately 54 years old. He'd been king for 27 years. His death triggered a succession crisis that would destabilize Norway for generations. The crusader who'd faced enemy armies couldn't face an empty cup. And that's the pattern, isn't it? Eric V, betrayed by his own marshal. Ramesses III, murdered by his wife. Anne Boleyn, executed by the man who'd changed religion to marry her. Mary Stuart, butchered after 19 years of imprisonment. The Romanovs, shot in a basement after surrendering their throne. Ælla, tortured by the sons of a man he'd tortured. Jane Grey, killed for a crown she never wanted. Sigurd, destroyed by celebration. 8 crowns, 8 corpses. The crown was never protection, it was always the reason. If this video made you think twice about the price of power, drop a comment below. Which death shocked you the most? And if you want more stories where history gets dark, subscribe and hit the bell. We do this every week.